Good morning. It is 10 a.m. in my part of the world. I know it's all sorts of time elsewhere in the world. So I'm starting with something personal. I grew up with an aunt who is bipolar. And it came with all sorts of things. And then I started working at an arts college, and I met quite a number of students who had similar conditions. I don't know if that's the right word to call it, so forgive me for saying that. Welcome to Reggae Online. This is Lounge Lyme. I'm Coleen Douglas, and today's conversation means something to me because of my own lived experience, and even more so because we live in a world where stress, anxiety, grief, burnout, emotional exhaustion have quietly become part of our everyday. Yet, for many people, particularly those of us who live in the Caribbean, um, strength is often measured by silence. Conversations around mental health can still, at this stage, feel distant. It makes us uncomfortable, and people will shame you for it. And we kind of get this culture of being taught to push through despite, to be strong, to carry the pain without naming it. I'm very happy that I've come to understand that healing doesn't necessarily have to begin in the traditional way where you go and you sit in front of a counselor. It don't have to start with no words at all. Sometimes it's with coloring, sometimes it's with music, sometimes it's with storytelling, and just making sense of what you're going through. Today we are exploring the role of art in mental health and emotional wellness, as a genuine pathway for healing, self expression, and connection. I'm very honored to be joined by two practitioners to hold space with us here in the lounge today. Debian Chambers, Dr. Debian Chambers is a counseling psychologist, cultural therapist, and poetry therapy practitioner. We also have, who is a good friend of mine, Lesli-Ann Belnavis, Elliot, who is an art therapist, actually the only practicing one in these parts. So I want to welcome both ladies to this screen. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
For having us, Coleen.
Welcome to the lounge. Welcome to the lounge. Um, I know, Debbie, you declared to me that you're not an art therapist, but you use art in your therapy. And
Mhm.
Leslie, you are a certified art therapist. So I kind of wanted to start with an understanding of what that is, so our audience is a little bit clear about what we mean by that.
Sure.
So, art therapy, I always call it like a beautiful marriage of art and psychology. And it's where someone is trained to be able to understand the psyche of the mind and the body, and also understand the therapeutic elements, the qualities of art materials, and how they can help persons to express, talk about, work through, cope with different stresses that they're dealing with, but using art forms. And in my specific training case, it is visual art. So, like drawing, painting, sculpture, and photography, and digital art making techniques and activities are used to help persons process those emotions. But you do have other forms like dance movement therapy, music therapy, drama therapy, poetry therapy, and other persons might be training the umbrella, which is depending on the part of the world that you live or were trained. It's called expressive arts therapy as well as creative arts therapy.
Mhm.
Thank you, Leslie. Debbie, you are not coming to
Mhm.
this space. You come to this space as a psychologist.
Yes.
So for someone, do we need artistic talent? Do we need skills to be able for our therapy to be effective, just based on your experience?
Oh, if we need artistic skills,
Mhm.
not at all. When people come to see me or I journey with people, for example, through poetry, one of the concerns is, but I'm not a poet. I don't know how to write poems. And I believe that we get some of that restraint from our educational system that says it must be done this way, it must be written this way. And there are a few of us who have some traumatic experiences in school, right? So for me, and I think for all the practitioners, Leslie and others, it's about expression. So it's not about grading your art, grading your poetry, but using it as a vehicle to express. The last thing I would say is, for right now at least, in trauma work, because I'm also a trauma-informed therapist, we believe that trauma is having an incomplete reaction to something when something isn't able to be processed through. And the reality is that many of us, myself included, sometimes we don't process sitting in an office, speaking words, naming feelings. We can process through our music. So, you think of the great dub poets like Muta Baruka, and enough oppression and sufferation were processed through in poetry, right? We process through dance, we process through art. Just look at Water Lane right now and the beautiful art that's there and what we're able to express and say without written words all the time.
Thank you. I have a little pounding in my background. I'm not so sure if that's being heard, so my apologies for that. But I'd love for both of you to share with our audience what drew you to this type of work.
You want to go ahead, Leslie?
Are we hearing Leslie?
I'm not hearing Leslie. I'm not sure.
No, I'm not hearing Leslie at all.
Okay. Yeah, there we go.
So everything you said in the last 40 seconds, you have to say it again.
No problem. So I was saying that I've always been an artist. I've always been drawn to this journey of that was a subject that I excelled in. I liked it. And my family and how my mother cultivated the arts in us. We are an artistic family. We dance. I've been in shows, all of that. So I've always leaned towards that and have an appreciation for that. But as I left high school, I was like, okay, what's the next step? So I followed the path of doing art. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to graduate. I have my bachelor's degree. What's going to be the next step? And, the common Jamaican saying, what do we say about artists? You were to be a starving artist. I was like, what's going to be the next step? And 3 different persons along the path told me about art therapy. And I was like, what is this? Am I going to be repairing walls? Like, I don't understand what this is. And the more I did the research, I realized, no, that's not what it is. It's what I said earlier, it's using the merging psychology and art. And that's something I was always a student in high school that friends came to me with their problems. So I didn't know that you had this profession where it actually was merged, where you could use the arts and psychology to help somebody. And luckily, I was at the university, Florida State University, where they do have the master's degree program. And I went and I took the introductory course. And the rest is history. And so I studied it and returned home to Jamaica to offer. What I feel is like it's so innate in us as creatives. We're telling a story, we're very colorful, we're very animated, but we also have a history of also being very aggressive and violent and not knowing how to de-escalate very well. Or regulate our emotions very well. So I thought, why not do something that merges the two, use what is innate in us to help people. And so here I am.
Thank you. I'm going over to you, Debbie.
Yeah. So thanks for that, because it gave me an opportunity to really think. There are lots of threads, right, in my life history. And sometimes when you look back, you can realize, oh, that was a bit of a thread forming there, even though you didn't know it at the time. So there's a poem by Pablo Neruda, and it goes, "It was at that time poetry found me." So when I was in my 20s, actually, I had a very good friend at the time who used to write poetry and introduced me to it in a different way, different than I'd been introduced at school, and something just clicked. It's a very kind of, I was introduced to the very kind of British poem still, but Elizabeth Barrett Browning and How many ways do I love thee? And we say, oh, what this? This is so interesting. But I didn't twin it at the time because I was pursuing psychology with healing until I went to a workshop and there was a psychologist, I believe his name was Michael Smith, and he used to call himself the counseling poet. And this was in New York at the time because I did grad studies in New York. And he performed the poetry very similar to how dub poets perform poetry. And I was absolutely mesmerized and introduced to the possibility that I could use this love of mine in healing work. And then that took off by itself in just finding mentors and so on. What I'll say about studying in New York, it's interesting because I think Leslie and I have that similarity where we studied abroad. I think for me, it was interesting how I had to go abroad to discover this thing that is just so profuse at home, but kind of being at home, you ignore it because you're raised going, oh, you must find a particular profession and it must look this way and that's what you must do. So it was kind of a returning to something that's very powerful in our culture. So yeah.
Okay, so I know just that line in that Neruda. Do you know any at all? We could share just a little bit of it,
Yeah.
because I find the poem itself interesting for this conversation.
Yes. So I'll Google it right now and bring it up as we continue to talk, and then I'll share it.
So what I'll say, Michael is also in the background and smiling. That it's that particular line in the Neruda poem. It carries. I don't know if I found it to be kind of a traditional poem, but almost an autobiographical piece that had some kind of. So it's and we want to go into that a little bit, but I wanted our readers to get a little sense of it.
Well, I can read the first stanza. I have it now. And what's beautiful, there's certain repetition of words, and poetry has a rhythm. And you know, rhythms can almost take you into an altered state when performed, but maybe we'll go into that later. So it says, and it was at that age, poetry arrived in search of me. I don't know where it came from winter or a river. I don't know how or when. No, they were not voices. They were not words nor silence. But from a street I was summoned. From the branches of night, abruptly from the others, among violent fires or returning alone. There I was without a face, and it touched me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Leslie, that particular poem is really about artistic awakening. So it was interesting when you brought it up, Debbie, because of what Leslie shared earlier about entering into the arts in the way that she started, and the notion of a broke artist, which really requires a whole podcast on, because we don't know where that is. Michael will tell you the same. We're really not suffering as artists. So that was interesting that the poem you came up. But I wanted to go to another misconception we have in society. Beyond the broke artist, we hear there are quite a bit of things that we say. When I started, I was talking about the shaming culture. If somebody see you go through the psychologist's door, then Lord, I'm mad, she am mad. So can we talk a little bit about these misconceptions, and are there any misconceptions when it comes to art therapy? Leslie, I'll go to you first.
Coleen. So I'll speak to the misconceptions around art therapy first, and then how I've seen the evolution of what I feel is a bit of an evolution of the stigma. With art therapy, a lot of people think it's just like a Rorschach test or a psychological type of test where we're going to hold up a picture and ask the person, what do you see? And then we say, or if somebody just does a color it automatically means something, and you just, you're diagnosing them immediately. Or another one is that everybody, because paint and sip has gotten so popular, they think art therapy is like a paint and sip. No, I'm not discrediting the feelings that it can bring up. You free up yourself, you're out with friends, bonus if you drink alcohol, but it's really a paint class because you're doing an image, you're painting an image. So it's a nice paint class for fun, for recreation. But art therapy is different. We have to understand psychological tenets. We have to understand different theoretical pieces, how that's applied to the behavior, to trauma, as well as also understand some art materials can help somebody. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can make it worse. So there's a difference between the two. So you have to really be trained in both. In terms of stigma now, or just the shift, I do think COVID shifted things a little bit. So if you ask me this pre-COVID, I'd be like, oh, the stigma is there. That's not saying it's not there, but I've seen a shift. I've seen a shift in terms of persons are not so like keeping it quiet that they're going to a therapist, or they are more actively seeking somebody. The amount of calls I got during COVID, I was like, whoa. Even if somebody didn't do a session with me, they were actively searching for someone. Whereas before it would kind of be like, oh, but you have to have money to do it, or I can't afford this. And there's still that issue. I know that there are some changes. I know there are some insurance companies that might cover certain conditions when you are to be seen. That's not that, there's still some work that needs to happen around that, but it's definitely shifting in terms of conversations. Where I work now as a counselor at UE, I do see persons are coming in. They're more aware of certain terminologies. They're having questions. They're wanting support before it gets maybe too late. So it's very interesting now to see that development. And I know Debbie can attest to some of that.
Actually, what I'd love for Debbie, thank you for that, Les. I think that's clear, and I don't want to run the risk of Debbie having to repeat. What I want Debbie to share with us, have you ever witnessed or someone, what am I trying to ask you? Witness someone discover a particular emotion through art that they didn't even know they were carrying it. Can you walk us through what that looks like?
All the time. So yes, I'll walk you through, and then actually there are some things about poetry therapy that I would like to share and discredit. I have so many personal examples for myself and for the people that I work with. I have seen, so I also work at the University Counseling Service. I have seen students come in with heavy trauma. I had one student in particular who would come in and not speak to me, just come in and sit in office session after session and not speak. And I could see that person try to get words out when I asked, how are you feeling or what is going on, but could not. And one day, I don't know what it was, I just said, I read a poem and I thought of you. And I read the poem and tears started coming down. And the person took out their own poetry. And that's how we started working together in a new way through poetry. And poetry does that all the time, because you will read something in a poem that speaks to your life. And it often helps you feel less alone. Or there is a line in a poem that helps you to understand what you are feeling. So I can give a personal example, I don't mind. When my father died, a poetry friend sent me a poem, Shifting the Sun. And every line starts with, when you lose your father. And there's a line, when you lose your father, you lose your umbrella against the shade. And I was like, that is it. I didn't have words for it before, but it was like, that is what I'm feeling and going through that I couldn't articulate. And that is a common experience in poetry therapy. I could give you 10 more examples, but What I would like to discredit, because I've had this experience even with other mental health professionals. No, it don't make sense for so and so, because so and so can't read very well, can't write, or so and so has or lives with a serious mental illness. I have worked in housing for people with chronic severe mental illness, and we use poems. People don't have to be able to read or write because they can speak to me of their experience and I can write the poem. Or we can listen to poetry together and talk about the felt experience, what happened in your body, what emotions come up. Poetry is also like art, because some people will write a poem with lots of white space or the use of particular full stops, etc., that makes the poem itself a piece of art that you enter into. So you don't need to, again, be a poet, be able to read, be highly educated, whatever that means, to be able to engage poetry therapy.
So I have a confession, Leslie. When I met Debbie first, it was in a poetry session. That was kind of a public grouping. It wasn't a private consent, just in case people think that I'm really mad, as they already suspect. But I like poems, and it so happened that what she was sharing was one of my favorite poems. It was Walcott's
Love after love.
Love After Love. And I was bawling throughout, and sometimes I wasn't sure why the tears were coming, but it was the poem, because someone was reading it aloud, because I think that's what happened. You're reading it aloud, you're reading it yourself, and you're now reflecting. And then I thought, oh, now I see how poetry could be therapy. And don't just love it, because it was really a moment to self-reflect. So I kind of get the poetry therapy. Perhaps I'm going to tell you, Debbie, to pull that up.
Sure.
And we use that as an example. And I want to go to Leslie on the. I have heard of students or young people who never spoken, but they walk into an office and what they can do is to draw how they feel. Have you had that experience? And do you have an experience of when does the shift happen? When do you, as a therapist, know when something is changing and you're breaking through for a patient, if that's what you call your clients?
So many, and I'm trying to like, so which one do I call? Which one do I name? So I've had vast experience of really young children I'll share a case of a former situation where it's a teen client who just had a lot of depression and a lot of suicidal thoughts, and just was really struggling with self-esteem, self-identity, coping issues, and work through like this particular client had a lot of metaphors. So they used a lot of like imagery to represent what they were, this particular kind of feeling. It might have been like a gray cloud, or they drew themselves in this kind of as the thing, as the let me just call it like the shredded girl or something like that, and they created this thing, and that became part of the character. That was a conversation in different sessions to like work through how, depicting like an emotion, and sometimes the emotion might be a shape, or it might be a character, it might be an element of self, and how they explore that in the session with me. So we had continuous sessions of just working this through to the point where I no longer see this client, but I now have a person contacting me to say, thank you so much for what you've done. This person is now has a great role and responsibility at the high school that they're at. But this is like years. This is a shift. What I will say is that the art is so, I love what Debbie shared about the poetry and, the words and the sentences. With the art materials, I've sometimes seen where persons come in, depending on their stress, their history, sometimes having a lot of anxiety and trauma, you see it physically on them and they don't have the words to say. So I might say, okay, here, use this material just to like what we call regulate or just kind of get them to feel calm. And sometimes it's not even about what they make, it's just the sitting down and holding this thing that they're channeling the emotion in. And I'll see like resistance. I see, you can see the guardedness because people are coming with stuff. So they might be guarded and not ready to like just be vulnerable with this person that they've just met. But having that piece of clay or plasticine that they're making something, they're touching, or another person came in and was like, I don't want to talk. Can I just make something? Fine. And they made something. And in the end, I think they created like a place that was relaxing for them. And you could physically see a shift in terms of how they were when they came in, if they didn't want to talk or they didn't want to do something. But the act of creating this image, like it shifted them. It shifted where they were when they came in. And the end result, sometimes it's like they just need that moment to create and have the release, and then we have a conversation around what's happening. Or sometimes persons come in and they're really struggling and it's so hard, or they're trying to figure out, they're trying to map what is happening, and they're talking, and I might be like, okay, can you create what your fears are or what's your anxiety? And you see the person create this thing, and while they're creating, they're working through, or they'll be like, sometimes it's words, which I know Debbie would love. Sometimes they're just writing it out and they're mapping. And somebody recently came in and was like, oh, wait, oh, this, whatever was in their mind, like, the stress. And they see it and they could compare and say, okay, so I work this through. I have autonomy. I have the ability to figure this out. I can do this on my own. So I know I give like a bunch of examples, but it's just a shift with seeing how people can come in, the visuals sometimes, the colors, stepping back, working through. We have a term called reflective distancing. So where what you shared, Coleen, where like the hair in the poem had caused a reaction, right? Emotional reaction for you. So sometimes when somebody creates a process, they create the material or the image, seeing it and stepping back, it brings up something like, oh my God, it can be an affirmation, a confirmation, and next steps of what they need, or they can take it as a coping mechanism to use. So that's the beauty of the process.
Okay, so because I want others to feel what I felt, because it was a good feeling, and Dr. Chambers does know how to set you up, because she asks you things like, what's the weather like today? Like what's the mood? I grew up saying, oh, what did I say? I was something like
Mm-hmm.
fine with some scattered showers
Yes. Yes.
and seemingly to be okay, but let's
Yes.
go. Let's
Yes.
go with
Thank
the
you.
poem.
Thanks.
It's one of
Well,
the Caribbean's
since you
finest
said,
authors. Can you find the poem,
since you
Miss?
said yes, well, since you said set up, that's what we do as facilitators, as Leslie was mentioning. So I would just encourage anybody listening to just take a deep breath in and out. It's often when our bodies are most comfortable that they can receive, right? And we can process things through. And as you listen to the poem, maybe notice what words or lines really resonate. You have a felt sense of this hitting deep. It might be a feeling in the chest or in the stomach. It might be a memory, right? So this is a famous poem, Love After Love, Derek Walcott. So we'll just take a breath together. Love after love. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself. To the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life. Ashe.
Actually, thank you. Michael, I'm putting you in this spot. You can come on the screen a little bit.
I'm not dressed.
Were you listening to the poem?
Yes, I was absorbing it. I was listening, but I was also kind of just taking in the tone of her voice as well, which was an additional thing.
Oh, thank you.
Did any line come out at you?
I can't say particularly, no.
How about you, Leslie? Michael, you disappoint me.
Oh, no. Maybe it was a feeling. Were you left with a feeling or sensation?
The calm, yeah, it's a very calm. There was a piece there that is what I picked up on, especially with the tone.
Yeah.
So pacing, tone,
Yes.
did something. Was there any line in that poem, Leslie, that pulled at you?
I just know how I felt when she said it. I don't know if it was the fourth line, Debbie, but I don't know how I heard it was like it was something about self. So
Yes.
I took it as my own journey as a mother, artist, whatever. Like
you will love again the stranger who was yourself.
Yes, that's it. That one resonate. I was meditating on that line.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point, Coleen. So as poetry therapists, we often give persons the poem. It depends, unless somebody's saying something and I'm writing a poem for them or we're listening. Because there's something about seeing the words. Of course, it depends on the crowd, but seeing the words as it's read so that you can underline in the moment what words come up for you.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because of what Leslie pulled out, and she said mother. How many mothers I've actually heard say that they've lost themselves because I think when we talk about any kind of therapy, people instantly think that you have to be mad out to get some kind of therapy. And we forget the self so much in the mothering, in the wifing, in all of those, in the working. And so I think that for me was what made me pause for the poem. In as much as I was very familiar with the poem, that allowed me to just pause for a moment and think about it. Who am I? Have I forgotten who I am? Leslie, Michael, and I have worked in the same space, and we've been privileged to work in a highly creative space where we're allowed to be ourselves for the most part. While others don't necessarily share that kind of a journey in work. So yeah, give thanks for that poem. I'm going to send Michael to go read and look at it, and he will share his own thoughts, having looked at it, because it may land differently.
Before I leave, I just want to say one thing, that in therapy in Jamaica is looked at in a particular way, but over here, because I'm in Boston now, and in the US, you're almost expected to have a therapist. It's expected. Almost everybody has a therapist. It's like, what did you tell to your therapist? It's like, yeah, I don't have one. But, you should get a therapist. So anyway, yeah, just to throw that in. All right, back to the dungeons for me. All right.
But I think the poetry therapy, and perhaps somebody else dance would resonate more. But for those people who connect with words, then the words are expressing some of the feelings that you may never have. So we often hear this expression about art heals or music heals. From your professional experience, and this is for both of you, what does healing through art look like in practice? Leslie, I kind of hinted at, but I wanted, somebody has messaged me to say she never really tell you when the patient or the client shift. what happens when someone is being healed through this art? Do you see it as a therapist?
Sorry, there is
Oh yeah,
background.
welcome to Jamrock. Yeah, where the
So I
weed
don't know if I
whackers
should let
are.
Debbie go first till the person
Oh,
pass.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. I can do that. Yes, yeah. And so it's art as healing, and then when do you notice the shift?
Yes. So
Yeah.
there are two things so that I don't have to come back in. I want you to share that. But I also have another question. Someone wants to be clear on what is psychological safety. This was sent to me in my inbox when we posted the flyer. What is psychological safety, and how do you get patients to feel non-judged? So,
Oh,
yeah.
That's a big one. All right, so lots of great questions. Maybe the safety first, because I think without a sense of safety, healing work really can't happen. It just can't happen. And so I guess in an informal way, psychological safety maybe just this felt sense or an experience that you are safe, that you're not being judged, or even, I mean, sometimes we struggle with that regardless, but enough so that you can share who you are and what your experiences are, whether it's sharing through words, sharing through art, sharing through poetry. So using poetry, I'm sure Leslie will speak about the art. For example, some of our children have not felt safe sharing their poems in school because, and I have met university students who also have not felt safe because when they share their thoughts, often the critique is this wasn't written well. You can't say that. That no make no sense. And if we listen to those words, my body feel already like it want kind of go in on itself. But safety helps you to expand, right? And what we say in therapy is that all we really want is to be seen and heard by ourselves, to see and hear and validate parts of ourselves, and to be seen and heard by others. And I would just invite persons to think about times when they really felt seen and heard and validated, and that is a sense of safety. And that happens in therapy because as therapists, when you're trained and trauma informed, I tell people all the time, listen, I've heard many, many, many things. And sometimes the thing where you think, say, Debbie, I go say, Lord, what this come in? Trust me, it's not. And I think about something has led you to this space, and I become curious about that. So I hope that in my sessions, I create a sense of safety for others. And it also means, see, I could go on about this, I must put my stuff, I mean, my stuff is always with me, but it really shouldn't be so with me that it interferes with listening to others, right? In terms of the question of, I think, when I see a shift, so Leslie was mentioning it actually, shifts can happen in the moment. Sometimes we're so braced. I don't know if anybody ever feel like you stress out one day. I can think of, maybe this happened yesterday. And somebody says something to you that was not, and you just go off. You're just gone. You just go off and everything.
Daily.
Yeah. All right. No, think about when you're actually relaxed and the body is not braced, and somebody says something to you, and that day you say, you know what, I'm not gonna take it up. Because your body is safe, it's relaxed, and you have a bigger container for things coming in. You have more resilience. So when Leslie speaks about the client coming in and breathing out, and she's noticing relaxation in the shoulders, or I am, you know, as Michael said, just this peace that's coming over you, that is a shift that's happening in the very moment in session that allows for more resilience. I had a client, I used to work in West Kingston, and this is kind of opposite, but it's funny. We do love our clients, you know, loved her to death. And she came and she said, Debbie, I never want to see you today. And so I said, well, how come? And she said, because I know when I talk to you, I'm going to leave calm and I'm not going to be. angry. And she have a neighbor who keep throwing things in her yard, and she needs to be angry because she need to cuss them out right now. And I was like, oh, all right, but you do need your fight sometimes. But in that moment, it's like, you know what? You have a different perspective where maybe this is not such a big deal. And so maybe the police don't need to be called in and more drama happens because you have more resilience. So yes, I think there was another question that I'm forgetting, but
No, you did both. You did both. So if Leslie could share her own thoughts, anything to add on those two?
I think Debbie said it really well. In terms of for me, so I have a phrase called art of trust. So which ties into the psychological safety question. And psychological safety can be in different, how I look at it is in tiers. So some of what Debbie said, what feels safe in the space for the person, what allows them to feel safe enough to be vulnerable, but also looking at the cultural piece. I call it the art of trust. And it was a hard lesson because I'm coming from being American trained. And sometimes, some people might be offended. I feel like sometimes the approaches in how the theories are is very like, let's process your emotions right away. And that don't work well with Jamaicans. I don't know you. You're asking me to come and open up. I don't know you. I don't know what you're going to do with this information. So I'll share about, there was a space that I worked in, which was a correctional facility space for 2 years with teens. And I would just always be frustrated because I was like, we would go in, the group sessions, and nobody is talking, nobody's sharing their art. They just want to make art for Miss Coleen or somebody else, or it's very like, you always felt surface level. And I was like, what's the point? However, it wasn't until when the project was ending and one ward of the state drew an image. In the image was highlighting the fact that they felt very angry, like they had a bubble, they had a thought bubble, and said, "Yo, you're not angry, da 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 da." I wanted, and of another person in the image was saying, "Remember what I was Belnavis at the time. What Miss Belnavis said, what you do, and really like talking about how to manage your anger." And I was like, "Wait, somebody actually this resonated." And that showed me that although you might have had this resistance or persons weren't sharing or talking about their art in the group, they couldn't. This is a correctional facility which already has a punitive energy, and you and I can be friends today, but because of the setting, we're enemies tomorrow. So if I open up to you today, that's going to be used against me. Or a correctional officer, they might feel like the person takes the information. So there's, trust. So that informs me in terms of like psychological safety. When I go to I did another project with these are no single mothers in an inner city community. And it's a project that's funded and I'm working with them. And the first day I already went in like, okay, I'm just gonna bring my materials and I have my focus for the 4 days. And in the first session, we looked at motherhood. We looked at themes around how do they feel? What are the, what's their strengths? What's the difficulties? What's the challenges? But every single person, Coleen and Debbie, called me aside and said, "Miss, I have to share, I have to tell them, we're there, and we're not just them people, the people are from here, so no." So I kind of laughed to myself because I was like, if they only realized there was a commonality. But I also respected that, if we're going to use the term, the psychological safety or the emotional safety, that they didn't feel ready to share. And you can't force it. And the art was very powerful because a lot of them had similar themes. I remember somebody said, "But they didn't share." I said, "It's okay. It's fine." And by the 4th day, what we did with the art and things that they could identify and relate to, by the end of the fourth day, everybody wanted to have WhatsApp group and sharing, and they created a little circle of mothers to support each other during their own journey. So that was powerful to me, but also understanding, like respecting who you're working with, what they're bringing. What I love about the art is that sometimes you don't have to talk all the time. It shows up.
It
It
speaks.
shows
Yeah.
up and they have the release. And don't know if I answered the other question, but
You did.
oh, I
You
think it
did.
was she wanted to know how the client had shifted. What I will say is with the example that I shared with the teenager, what I started to see is that even though they might have had elements of depression showing up, they were doing things that like socially they weren't doing before. They were working through like coping mechanisms. So even if it was a struggle, they were challenging themselves. They're doing the art on their own. They're working through their going into spaces that was difficult for them. So and this is over a 3-year period. So it's a process.
Yeah. And Coleen, if I can highlight something Leslie said, because it was so important, I don't want the audience to miss it. So, as trauma therapists, we believe healing is happening when you're socially engaged. That's a huge sign. So, say in Jamaica, we're well traumatized because the popular saying is, I don't need anybody, I just me, right? That is a sign of a society that holds a lot of trauma. And given our history, that makes a lot of sense and the modern day realities. So when Leslie speaks of a group in which women initially, understandably, because of their context, don't trust anybody and don't talk, but after 4 days are willing to set up WhatsApp groups, that's a huge healing happening within 4 days. And so now they have more resources and social support. Because as trauma therapists, we also believe the best people to support you are actually, and group therapists believe the people who have been through are in the same situations. So Leslie created a space where some of that fight or flight reaction that we have, and sometimes the freeze reaction when you get depressed and frozen, was kind of like shaken up, and they could get into social engaging, which is healing.
Thank you. I do believe in community for healing.
Yes.
So thank you for that. That ones know that they can find a community,
Yes.
even if it's not a formal space in the way that you offer it. I wrote my question because I was listening, and sometimes you forget. How can we use, and because of the art of trust, that's a book, Les. How can we use art therapy or arts in therapy to shift some of the common stigmas associated with therapy, especially in Jamaican Caribbean context?
Yeah. Well, I can think of a story. Being a poetry therapist, it's Prof. Hickling's work. So I was also mentored by Freddie Hickling, and Freddie Hickling did cultural therapy in Jamaica, where he used drumming was a huge part of it, and you can have a whole different segment on drumming because there's a science to that and healing, dance, art, and poetry. And what Prof was very big on was having a performance at the end of his cultural therapy engagements. So children, usually 8 to 10, would go through this 3-week experience, and they would perform some of their poems and their music. And all the time, parents in the audience, teachers, he would invite politicians, would have this shift in their head in terms of the perception of the children, and the children's realities were destigmatized. I did a qualitative research interviewing some of the teachers, and one of the quotes I will never forget, the teacher said, "I thought they were bobbleheads," describing the children. But when they saw the children on stage performing poems, and one of the poems that I remember was, we want books, tell the government, say we not turn no crook. When the teachers saw them on stage performing and drama and music, they wait, these are extremely talented children who have so much to say about our social and political realities in Jamaica. And so that process destigmatized therapy, it destigmatized the children, and it shifted this kind of look from what do them to what happened to them, and how are we contributing to that, which I thought was quite beautiful.
Nice. Thank you. Les?
Um, so for me, I think it's ask the question one more time, Colleen. How
It's
does
how we can use art or arts therapy for that matter to shift some of the common stigmas associated with therapy in the Caribbean.
it's starting, and I think it also has to be tied to understanding the importance of the arts and why we need it, and how it helps to, I could drop some words, destabilize, like balance your, regulate you. So, for example, I have naturally incorporated the drum. I couldn't play the drum. Now I can play, because I couldn't play the drum. I would just bring it in because my experience was that I saw that music. I saw when I go to do a workshop, how persons are naturally singing through when we're doing something with trauma related themes. Okay, music is coming up, and this is coming up naturally. Now, this is historical. As Afrocentric people, we know where that's coming from, but music is coming up. The drum has been something that I have used it naturally. It has become a tool that persons channel the anger, just the expression in it. I think it's also really like we need to have our school systems and the government understand the importance of why we need the art forms mandated in our educational thing. So it's gonna tie in. It doesn't have to be a structured therapeutic space, because these things naturally are an outlet for all of us. The drumming, the singing, the movement, the dancing, the cooking, the making art, all of these things are expression. And when that is shut down, it suppresses an element of the person. So I think one thing is more on a political, or just even just on an awareness of embracing it more. This is my thing, right? Embracing it more and putting it out there why we need it. We're seeing a lot of things happening in school. I bet you don't have a theater arts program. Or if you have it, it's shut down or it's not consistent. Why not bring these things in and see it more? And then, okay, if you have that, that's an element of an aspect of therapy. Yes, you might not have a therapist, but it's an outlet. It helps. And then bridge that to a therapeutic space similar to what Debbie shared. So I hope I answered.
And Coleen, if I may, just two short things. When Leslie was speaking, you know what? Chronic's album came to mind, Exile, and he has a song on there that go, "We're not afraid of them science and technology, because we have science and technology long time." So as Leslie was talking about the drumming, and we were smiling when Leslie said she can drum now, because we both go to Jessie G's drum circle, so Jessie G drumming. And so we've learned a lot about the power of arts there. Yeah.
And I know said that was just a PR drop.
Yes, I do that everywhere.
Jesse has to come and sit with me just because of
There
that.
you go.
But yes,
Yes.
it is.
Something I wanted to add, sorry, that I remembered too, is interesting. And I feel like every time I have done the work or do a group session or a workshop, it helps to shift. What I've found is like every time I go, always, especially if it's adults, they always say, "But I can't draw what this lady have me do." And by the time we'll be ending and wrapping up, they are cussing me off because they want more time. They want more time. They want this outlet. Or you have persons, you see it physically. I worked with a group of staff members, high stress position, and people zoning out because they just needed that time to just be themselves. And you see them say, "Oh my gosh, I have not done this since childhood. I have not gotten this opportunity to have this release." So I think if we embrace the arts in that way more, make it structured, have it within the systems, have it within an outlet, staff level, educational level, it will help to break the it will help to support in a different way.
Thank you. I like for us to, I know we're close to wrap up. Sometimes we go a little over the hour. But to think about in Jamaica, I'm not sure if it's a world thing, but we celebrate Child's Month in May. We also celebrate Mental Health Month, or we observe Mental Health Month. We've had Mother's Day. What other? We had something recently in May as well. But anyhow, so we have those big internationally, in some instances, days that we observe or the month. So when we talk about parents, I think children are completely different from what I was growing up. So for a parent who really don't know where to start with a teen or a young child who they might consider troubled or having difficulties emotionally, what advice could you give to them just to support their children emotionally through creative activities?
They start where the child is at. Pay attention to the child, pay attention to what they're showing you, pay attention to what they respond, look at their energy. If you see them wanting to kick a ball, maybe encourage them to go play football, channel that energy. If you notice that the child is tapping the table, and probably might loud and fidgety, but maybe he's listening to music in his head and it's showing up in his body and he's tapping that chair, you probably have a drummer, right? So it's starting with where they're at, what they're like, looking at their development. I know maybe, you might not be sure. So have them, you're going out on a trip and the child becomes easily distracted. Look at their age. They express themselves. Developmentally, it's more appropriate. How they communicate is through the arts. So we don't come out of the womb knowing language. We come out understanding the world through movement, through touching something. The baby puts the thing in the mouth first, sensory, right? And then eventually they learn movement, they start to walk, all of these things. So that's why you need to hone that more or support that more. Even if you don't understand the language around it, pay attention to it. Give them the opportunity to express themselves. So have a coloring book if you can, or even if it's just a pen and a piece of cardboard that they're drawing on until. So my thing is just paying attention to the child and supporting that creative spirit, however it shows up. If they like to sing, they like to write poems, play music, give them that space, let them dance. That's my advice.
Thank you. Gabby?
Yeah, so ditto on everything Leslie said. If to add maybe two more points, children live what they learn. And so it's also great if your children can see you engaging the arts. And as I was listening to Leslie, I'm thinking about that, because I say I weave little parts of how I came to poetry. So my mother used to write poems. She still does. So I grew up with my mother writing all these rhyming poems and sharing them with us. And it wasn't until I got to my 20s and maybe definitely more fully know that seed that was planted then has really grown. So it's so important, in addition to doing all these wonderful things that Leslie has shared, so important that your children see you engaging in the arts, because that's very powerful. Also, and Leslie mentioned this earlier, engaging the schools and encouraging the schools and supporting it if resources are available. I know finances are so hard. So if your child's primary school decide I'm going to cut out drumming at assembly, which has happened in my experience when I was doing cultural therapy, just go to school and say, no, it's needed. Allow your voice to be heard. And then the final thing, so I have worked both with children and teenagers. Sometimes I'm afraid of teenagers myself. And I remember working with the children in Prof's cultural therapy, and we used to do all sorts of breathing exercises. Same thing with Leslie. I was like, I don't know if this is helpful. And we had a big concert, and one of the little girls ran up to me. She said, Auntie Debbie, we need to, and I was like, what? She said, yeah, feeling anxious, I need those exercises. I was like, what? And then I realized sometimes it hits children and teenagers, but they're not going to tell you So just keep doing it. Similarly, boys at Alpha that I used to work with, when we're looking for time to cut from the schedule, I said, just cut my class, because the boys sometimes they don't really look into it, and they cut the class. And almost every boy on campus came up to me privately, and what they said was so sad. They said, they used to call me sister, you don't love us anymore. And I said, what would make you say that? Because you don't come in class and do dub and poetry. I said, but you needed extra time. And I remember one boy said, it's just so it stays, sister. We really loved it. It's just so it stays. So just keep at it. Even when you think you're not making an impact, you would be surprised.
Yep.
Okay, so normally I try to give my guests a moment of personal reflection, but I want to put you in the spot. You are Debbie, the Minister of Health for a year. And when you think of using art in therapy, what could you do in that position to make this a part of our everyday lives? And Leslie, I'm giving you Minister of Education. The two can work together. How do we make mental health as a part of our everyday? So that
Yes. I try not to get myself in trouble by some of the things I'm not gonna say, because Lily laughing because she know me. All right. If I were Minister of Health, the first thing that came to my mind is I would have art and poetry therapy drumming at Bellevue. If it's not already there, I think it probably is at Bellevue. And in Ward 21 at the University Hospitals of the West Indies. Definitely. There is a Brazilian psychiatrist, Nisa de Salveiro. If you saw the artistic work that her patients did to this day, decades later, it's being shown in museums. So if you want to destigmatize mental illness, please, may I beg you, make your patients do art, because people will be blown away by the things they produce. I would have poems on the walls and art and mural on the walls of the University Hospital of the West Indies in particular. Yeah. As people are walking around to have moments to just breathe, as you think of going into the cancer ward, as you think of going into your surgery, to be met with art and poems that will say, feast on your life, it's gonna be okay. It is amazing what words can do for people and art can do for people who are going through illness. Bustamante Children's Hospital, Leslie said that for sure, children. Sometimes I go into places, I'm not calling out those hospitals, but sometimes I go into places and I go, even places that I've worked, is this a healing place? Because if I come in here, I'm going to feel more depressed. The walls just gray and dark and whatever. So those are definitely things that I would do. And I would support as a Minister of Health, liaising with other ministries, I would support the arts. I don't know, build back word theater, have public, more public arts supported and funded by the government. People can engage in. Don't we say, last thing I say, they had shown some studies that during football seasons like World Cup, there's less violence. Yeah. So can you imagine? Marcus Garvey used to talk about that with just having performances and so on in public where people can come for free. That is health and healthcare. All right, so I'm going to stop this because we could go on.
Thank you. Yes, Minister of Education, the Honorable Leslie Belnavis Elliot.
So I would say I kind of alluded to some of it earlier, but I would think going back to, I honestly think we need to change up our education system. And I know people might come for me, but I'm a believer in, because Jamaica already has a brand, which is the arts. And why not in the educational system really look at maybe what do we need to revamp our educational system and perhaps make the start and the end of the day be art activities or arts subjects. How do you start the day? You're gonna start the day with movement, start the day with art, having that in there, or how you teach the subjects, it's art related. I remember when I was at the correctional facility place, they did yoga with drumming, right? So how could we start? And I'm sure in some cultures they probably start with their Tai Chi or yoga first, and it's implemented and everybody goes and they have the science behind it. Why aren't we looking at that? So in the educational system, perhaps thinking about how we can use that structure, the curriculum to have more arts-based integration, have funding for more items, more instruments, not just the recorder alone, but other things, because this helps with stimulation, it helps with concentration. We think it's just a frivolous thing. It actually helps. When they're going to have exams, it's mandatory. We're not cutting out anything, but we're actually going to do a meditation through art before exam pep is almost over. How can we do that? So that would be my thing, is integrating it in the curriculum for supporting the children.
Thank you. I am going to go to asking you for your final word to our audience. Your final word could be anything. It could be you singing, Debbie, or giving us a
Well, I have
line.
a poem. I have a 5-6 line poem.
And Les can probably bring out her drum.
Yeah.
Jesse would be proud. So yes, Debbie, we go to you first.
Right, and shameless plug too. Coleen and I met at True Self, which, as Leslie mentioned, yoga. All right, one of my favorite poems is Nayiro Waid, right? Love Nayiro Waid's poem. So here's a very short poem. Do not choose the lesser life. Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Choose the life that is yours. The life that is seducing your lungs, that is dripping down your chin. Ashe.
Ashe. Let's see what you're coming with. There's nothing better in the world than literature, you know, so let's see what happens.
Just wanted to drum, and I would just invite you guys to just tap, to just like and just encourage the viewers to embrace time for themselves, their children, the staff, just engage in something creative, even for the day, for the rest of the week, even if it's 5 minutes a day, just having that outlet for themselves. That's my encouragement.
Thank you. Thank you. And so we say to our listeners to always make space for your well-being. And well-being is not a luxury. It really is a necessity. It's important that you recognize that. We want to thank you, ladies, for your care, for your patience, for your love, and for your presence with us on the Lounge Lyme. Thank you so much, Dr. Debbie-Ann Chambers and Lesli-Ann Belnavis Elliot. I'm Coleen Douglas. This has been the Lounge Lyme on Reggae Online. Thank you, Michael.